Welcome back to It's Haunted, What Now? I'm your host, Lanie. Is it just in my house, or is this the time of year when everyone, everywhere is starting to get sick? I don't know if it's the weather or the way we're all going out and seeing each other more, but it definitely feels like everyone I know is either getting sick, recovering from being sick, or their kids are all sick, or all of the above, as in my case. Annoying? Maybe, but there's a lot to be grateful for that it doesn't seem to be anything serious, and really for the opportunity to rest, recover, and relax. And what better way to do that than with our most recent collection of creepy stories? We've pulled together some good ones for you this time around with friendly apparitions, missing friends in more ways than one, and double takes that will have you second-guessing what you see. It's a lot to cover, so tuck yourself into a cozy little spot, get something warm or cold to drink, and let's get going. Okay, ready to get spooked? Our first story comes from Creaturehunt, who seems to think that there's an entity in their home that wants to help more than harm. I have a cheap white noise maker from a retail store. I prefer the ocean setting, but if you unplug it and power it back on, it defaults to a water dripping or the sound of a stream. I'm pretty sensitive to a sudden change in white noise, so the default sound usually wakes me up if our house loses power for a second. So there has been a string of cold days lately in the Pacific Northwest. It's to the point where our washer and dryer out in the garage had their water lines froze, which has never been a problem before. I had to unhook everything and route the lines into a bucket so that when they thawed, I could catch the water. On to the taps themselves. The hot water wasn't frozen, so I left it dripping. The cold water tap was frozen, so I did what I could with my heat gun before putting it nearly closed. My idea was that if it thaws, any excess pressure will be relieved as long as the tap is somewhat open. It was supposed to rise above freezing the following afternoon for the first time in a few days. My cat's auto feeder goes off at noon, but she likes to wake me up an hour before it goes off. I wanted some sleep, so I got up around 11:40 to press the food button to get some peace and quiet. While I was up, I poked my head into the garage. The hot water tap was still dripping, but the cold water was frozen shut. Exhausted, I headed back to bed. At around 12:20, I was half awoken by my white noise machine switching to the running stream setting instead of the ocean setting. I was still mostly asleep, but I rolled out of bed to switch the setting back. My cat was immediately really excited to see me out of bed, so I humored her and followed her to the kitchen, where I heard water trickling noises. I looked into the garage to find the cold water tap had thawed, and I hadn't closed the tap enough. There was water spraying everywhere. I managed to get the tap closed to a drip and mopped up most of the water. There really wasn't much water overall since it seemed I had caught the spray just after it had started. I actually really needed some laundry done, so I threw a load in and hooked the thawed supply lines back up. I started the machine and got back into bed. I have a bad habit of scrolling on my phone instead of trying to sleep after being woken up too many times, so that's what I found myself doing. I was scrolling on my phone, laying next to my girlfriend who sleeps in way later than I do. She was slowly starting to wake up and chat with me when suddenly the white noise machine switched to the running stream setting for the second time that morning. I ignored it this time as I was nice and warm in bed. About 5 minutes later, my girlfriend was properly awake and asked me why the white noise was different. I told her it happened earlier in the morning too, but that I wasn't sure why since nothing else had lost power. Eventually, we both shrugged it off and got up to make breakfast, turning off the white noise machine altogether. That's when I heard water running in the garage for a second time that morning, and I threw the garage door open to find water gushing absolutely everywhere. This time, the drainage pipe must have been frozen, because the washer was ejecting soapy water everywhere, and it was spraying back into the garage. It had been going a lot longer than the first time I'd caught it, and there was soapy water absolutely everywhere. The first time my white noise changed, I checked the garage almost immediately and caught the tap. The second time, I ignored it for a few minutes, which lined up with there being significantly more water on the floor before I caught it. Is a friendly house spirit watching over me? Did a ghost mess with the machine to alert me of the potential flooding? I'm not sure what to think. Now listen, if you're going to have a spirit in your home, I think the best you can ask for is one like this one. I wonder if it can let you know of other things too, like when you've forgotten to put the kettle on to boil, or when your vegetables in the fridge are going bad, or when your pipes are about to burst, in my case. In all seriousness though, I love that you seem to have a little guardian spirit who knows you well enough to know how to get your attention. It's a handy little friendly ghost to have around. Our next story comes from warpedrazorback, who thinks that they may have become a null since the loss of their attached entity. About 30 years ago, an event led to me discovering I had an entity attached to me. I called him the Faceless. Everyone else referred to him as my friend. He was always protective of me. Towards others, he was sometimes protective and sometimes antagonistic, but usually he was just neutral. I could always feel him if I tried to. At one point, he became so antagonistic towards a roommate of mine that I ended up reaching out to a local group of paranormal investigators. At the most extreme, he chased her through the house to her room and audibly laughed in my voice on the other side of her door after she slammed it. He shoved another person's shoulder, poked another person's back, and would occasionally cause things in a closed closet to fall off shelves. I met with the investigators, a husband and wife, a woman who designed spirit boards, and another woman I can't remember. I told them the whole story about the Faceless, how he came into my life, and what the current events were. After the meeting, the husband followed me out to my bike and shared his personal insight with me, which I thought was really cool of him. They were supposed to meet up with my roommate to get her perspective, but I think either she or they never followed through and I never heard back from them. I can't say for sure exactly when this happened, but I've lost that sense of connection. I can't feel the Faceless anymore. I can say that once I noticed the loss of his presence is when the null began. I've never felt like I had any particular personal affinity towards anything spiritual or paranormal, and to be honest, I feel silly even saying that. I've always been a hopeful skeptic. However, spiritual and paranormal things seem enhanced, for lack of a better word, whenever I was around. Ouija and spirit boards worked better if I was in the room. Tarot cards did things I don't understand. People with the sight saw things more clearly or things they hadn't seen before just because I was there. Just stuff that seemed weird to me, but I eventually just started taking it for granted. Ever since I stopped feeling the Faceless, it's been the exact opposite. I feel nothing at all like I used to. I think the event that really made it sink in for me was I went on a popular and successful guided ghost tour. And because of me, I feel like 12 people wasted their money. There was zero activity, which for this tour was extremely unusual. I could tell the guide was completely baffled and even offered everyone on the tour a rain check. He tried one last spot, a location that isn't usually on the tour, but he was obviously pretty desperate. As my own experiment, I hung out at a spot on the route back to the tour guide's office, and sure enough, they all said they had various levels of activity or experiences at the spot where I wasn't present. I spoke to the guide afterwards and asked if he had any insight or thoughts on my conclusion, but he hadn't heard of anything like it before. I've tried a couple of other minor experiments and they've shown pretty much the same results. One other weird thing I've noticed is I can't go into shops that sell crystals, at least not the ones around the Sedona area. My daughter is pretty witchy, or at least likes to think she is, and so we went into a couple of shops up there. Almost immediately, I was dizzy and nauseous. I asked one of the shop owners about it, and she suggested I hold something raw and ferrous, like raw iron ore or a similar mineral. I've tried it, and it helps a bit, but I'm still very uncomfortable. Like I can feel the dizziness and nausea just surrounding me without actually touching me. To be honest, I feel kinda dumb, even opening up on the topic, but I miss my friend, and I don't know enough about the paranormal or spiritual or whatever to do anything about it. I guess I'm hoping someone can help me figure out if I'm right, that I create this spiritual void around me, or if it's something else. I'd love to if someone could tell me how to reconnect with the faceless, but my heart tells me that's not a real option for some reason. I don't know. Maybe that's just my fear. And if I am correct and I do create this null zone, maybe someone can give me some advice on how to make it useful. If I'm right and the faceless is just gone, maybe I can at least find purpose in what's left after his absence. This is such an interesting possibility and not something we hear about very often. I think this is the first time on the show we've ever talked about anything like this. And I wonder if the faceless was your amplifier for a reason. And now that it feels you don't need it anymore, it's moved on and just kind of let you live your life in what it thinks is peace. Although we could do without the nausea, anybody could. Maybe one day the faceless will come back, but in the meantime, I hope you find a way to put your nullifying powers to use. Maybe you can help someone who's too sensitive and you guys can help balance each other out or teach grounding techniques. So many people could use something like that. So hopefully whatever path is meant for you is one that kind of makes itself visible. Our next story is from Liv, who is looking for help after being tormented by a spirit. I have some sort of entity in my house that is getting more and more active, and I don't know how to get it to stop. The lights in my bathroom flicker even when I screw them in tighter. Lights in my bedroom have turned on and off by themselves. I often see something in my peripheral vision. Whenever I look at it, it disappears, but it seems like it's wearing some kind of black robe, and I often feel and hear 3 gentle taps on my temple every now and then, usually when I'm trying to fall asleep. It's unsettling having this much activity lately, since the activity had previously declined. Here's a little background. I live at home with my family in my childhood bedroom in the basement. When I was a teenager, I was really stupid. At one point, my friends and I held a seance with a Ouija board in my room. We made contact with something that called itself Jason. It told us things we knew were lies, like that it died in this house, the house had no previous owners, and stuff like that. We said goodbye, stored the Ouija board in the hall closet, and thought that was the end of it. After that, there would be random cold spots in my room. You could be sweating in the room from the space heater until you sat on the bed, and then it would be freezing cold. There was also a super uneasy feeling in the hall where the closet was. Then, at some point afterwards, I started seeing this thing. It was like it used to be a woman, but there was black nothingness instead of mouth and eyes, and it was smiling literally from ear to ear. I would always pretend I didn't see it, walk past and go about my business. I eventually told some friends about the creepy thing and explained how it was next to the Ouija board. We made a plan to bury the board. I took the board to my friend's place. She gave me some sage and I tried to light it over the Ouija board. Strangely, the spring in the lighter shot straight out, leaving the lighter completely useless. I had to go get another lighter, got it successfully lit away from the board, and cleansed the board. Then, as we were talking about where to bury it, we saw a very young kid standing in the street, just staring at us. We went to see where his parents were, but as soon as we walked his way, he ran. We watched him go directly into a house that my friend said she thought was abandoned. My friend swears he was a demon, but I personally think she was paranoid. We left the board on the sidewalk to go get lunch, frankly because we were really stupid. When we came back, you guessed it, it was gone. I figured though, since the board was out of my possession, I was safe. I went home and cleansed my area very thoroughly. I stopped seeing that terrifying apparition, so I figured all was well, even though I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. There are a lot of antiques in my home, so I figured it was possible that something from one of those was watching me. A lot of people who don't know about the Ouija incident have said they feel like they're being watched, or that something isn't right in my room. I would just ignore it because it wasn't bugging me too much and I cleansed my room. Just having an eerie feeling and a light flicker here and there seemed harmless enough, but now it's getting ridiculous. I'm having trouble sleeping because I'm seeing something moving around my bed, and I wake up several times in the night, around 3 and 4 a.m. What do I do? In my experience, it definitely sounds like you've ticked something off, you've opened something, and I don't envy you for it. But I think you're moving in the right direction with cleansing, and maybe there's an opportunity to reach out to any local spiritual groups and see if they can help. While nothing necessarily dangerous has happened yet, it's better to be safe than sorry and really set a firm boundary that nothing is welcome in your space that isn't positive and pleasant. That's really the rule I have for anything that comes into my home. I don't allow anything with negativity allowed whatsoever. Our next story is from MajorFalcons, who bring a creepy tale of their entire family seeming to disappear almost right before their eyes. One day a few years ago, I was with my parents, my sister, and some other family members like my cousins out at a park. We were walking, chatting, until we came across a rocky beach area. I was following my older cousin while my younger cousin was behind me. We were jumping from rock to rock together, and as we neared the end of the beach, I looked down to see where I was going to jump next. When I looked up, my cousins were gone. They had just vanished, both of them. I yelled their names and nothing. There was no one, not my parents, not my aunt and uncle, none of my other cousins. Everyone was gone. I left the rocky beach and tried to look for them. They were nowhere near me that I could see, and I didn't have my phone on me to call them. So there I was, lost alone and trying not to panic. Thankfully, I remembered where the car was parked, so I walked all the way back, nearly an hour-long trek. I waited by the car for nearly another hour when suddenly my entire family walked up. Everyone was worried about me, but everyone was okay. Even my cousins were there, despite having disappeared nearly in front of my eyes. I asked where they'd gone, and they told me that they'd left the beach long before the end, which was where I'd last seen them. I was dumbfounded. Who was I talking to? Why did they look and sound exactly like my cousins? Why did they suddenly disappear? Were they trying to separate me from the group, and if so, why? Ew, so this story reminds me of old folklore, usually Celtic in nature, where fae will take the familiar form of loved ones and lure people to their doom in the moors or bogs of the wilderness. Probably a good thing that you stayed on the beach or that you weren't tempted to follow them anywhere else. I'm not necessarily saying that's what happened here, but it's definitely the first thing that came to mind, and it's a very interesting experience to think more on. And the second thing that came to mind is that maybe it was a mirage, but mirages don't talk back, so that's a little scary. Well, that does it for this episode, unless you're an Apple subscriber, in which case, stay tuned after the credits, where you'll get to hear additional stories as a special treat. If you'd like to submit your own personal spooky tale to be read on the show, head to hauntedpod.com and click on the link to submit your story. You can also email me, hauntedpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a positive review on Apple Podcast or your podcast player of choice. It really does help. You can find us on Twitter, for now, at podcast_haunted, Instagram at It's Haunted What Now, or at hauntedpod.com. Production assistance by Jesse Hawk. Writing assistance by Meg Williams. The official composer and audio smith for the show is Neeks at We Talk of Dreams. Check him out on Twitter at We Talk of Dreams or wetalkofdreams.com. Until next time. Did you hear that?